Again, are Christians in a new covenant relationship with God? Now, just bear with me, folks. Last time we did this, the covenant and the church, and you can go back to last month's WebEx and listen to it. But 2 months before that, we did You Are Not a Jew, and I'm going to review this because it's an intro to this month's teaching. With You Are Not a Jew, Jesus had his own church. Remember that, Matthew 16:18. He's now head of this church, which is his body, but it's not like his own church. It's a little different because his church was a Jewish church. On this rock I will build my church. He did not know anything about the church, which is his body, because this was a secret. Now, I gave everybody a copy of this little paper called What is the Church? For those who wanted it. Those who didn't get a copy of that, email me at We went through Israel is Israel through the scriptures, unless God decided to change it, which we haven't found one verse yet in which he did. And then I asked the question of you all, is Israel history or does she have one? And that's the title of one of the appendices of the book, The Secret of God. And we answered that with, yes, she has a future. She isn't histoire. So then the next month, January, we went over the Gentiles. Now that, to me, I really consider that the key to understanding this whole topic of the people of God, not the people of God, who gets in, who doesn't. And we went a little bit over the gods who were given territorial jurisdiction over the nations, over the Gentiles, and how Israel was the Lord's portion. That's in Deuteronomy 38:9, I believe. And then as a people for God's own possession, you can read that for yourself in 1 Peter 2:9, as Peter is addressing the Jewish Christians and how they had become truly a people for God's own possession. And then the Gentiles, I covered with you, were not totally excluded from the blessings of the Israelite nation because of God choosing them in his own, gave them a promised land, as I showed you that the gods in Deuteronomy 30, the sons of God actually, in Deuteronomy 32:8, were given jurisdiction in land by taking you back to the Tower of Babel and how all those lands were divvied up. Okay? Now, the Gentiles were not excluded totally from the blessings during the first 4,000 years of time with man on the planet, and yet in the future, some nations are going to be punished. And I showed you a little bit of what appeared to be a schizophrenic layout of the Gentiles are nice, the Gentiles are going to get their heads bashed in. No, some Gentiles are good. They can come in if they do this, 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 and this, and their males get circumcised, and the Gentiles are okay here, but they got to do this. And we laid that out pretty well. So if you want to hear about that, go back to the January 15th WebEx. And then I showed you the difference, like Abraham, Jonah, the Magi, and in Romans 2, they had these Gentiles, or just people, had the law written in their hearts. Jonah, when I say Jonah was a Jew, but Jonah ministered to the city of Nineveh, which was definitely a Gentile city. And they repented, and that didn't sit too well with Jonah. Anyway, then we showed the future judgment, Psalm 2, where Jesus is king with a rod of iron, and then also the future healings, Revelation. So I put this stuff down here by way of review. Then, of course, we went to the covenants in the church, and I showed you my favorite verse of Scripture, Hebrews 8:13, which it said that the old covenant was not yet gone, and the new was not yet here. And I think, if I remember correctly, I showed you this lovely graphic where I'm still working on this. I've morphed it even this month, where the old covenant here is not yet gone, the new covenant's not yet here. We're sitting in here as the purple man, the one new man, Christians as servers of the new covenant. And we'll get into a little bit more of that tonight because it's critical. And then the last thing I said, and I posited a question to everybody, is the Christian church in the new covenant, and I asked you guys to look at what it meant to be in Christ or in the Lord. So now, with that being said, let's go to this month. One of the things that I did cover with you was, and those of you that have never studied theology or have never heard much of historic theology, you're going to get an earful tonight, because I'm going to explain to you this little term here: replacement theology, Reformed covenant theology, and dispensational theology. And the reason I need to do that is because you're going to see some progressive changes in the church. Replacement theology is a term that came to pass after the first century, when the early church fathers of the Christian church started playing God. They started to declare that the church had replaced Israel in God's purposes. And I have a paper that I've written. It's called A Short History of Interpretation, called O Gollyology. And, you know, I don't think I have it. So forgive me. Yeah, I do have it up here. Let me read a few things from that, and then we'll get back to the PowerPoint. It's called A Short History of Theology. Here it is, and I'm going to send it to those that want it. Okay. Many of you reading this book, and this is a chapter in the book, will be met here with a new vocabulary, concepts from which we would call it a theological cookbook. And in theology, you've got crazy words like systematic theology, ecclesiology, which is the study of the church, soteriology, the study of the topic of salvation, Christology, study of the nature of Christ, eschatology, study of the end time. Long-winded, and kind of this chapter sort of goes over a few of them, but what I wanted to bring out, and what I want to bring out in this teaching, is that we are dispensationalists. And I'm going to go back and show you that indeed the end of historic theology, coming around here, come on, doesn't feel like coming out. There it is. Dispensational theology. In the early 1800s, this branch of theology recovered the secret of God. Okay? It recovered the rapture, the special place of the church in the purposes of God. And indeed, we are dispudoodles, as I call them, and it's with a twist. The Christian church was a secret, and all that entails comes under dispensational theology. Okay? Dispensational theology. Now, with that being said, I want to go back to that paper, because that paper, A Short History of Interpretation, goes through how we got here from there. And I show in the paper how there is a paradigm shift in history, whereby about the 3rd century A.D., the church went through an upheaval purposed by the Edict of Milan, by which Constantine declared and legitimized Christianity as a religion. But when he did that, he legitimized what was being taught at the time. And at that time, it was replacement theology. And the simplicity of replacement theology was that the early church fathers had been teaching that the church had replaced Israel. And that got, when Constantine legitimized Christianity, and from then on through the Reformation, replacement theology as taught by the Roman church lived. And so you had no idea that the church might have been a secret. No, it was just the next thing in the purposes of God, and Israel was no longer on the map. It was the church, Christianity, and therefore you had a lot of anti-Semitism grow up, and that anti-Semitism, of course, I think the final fruition of it was coming out of Nazi Germany in the early 20th century. And even though we had some changes in the Reformation period, it didn't quite replace replacement theology. Now, Reformed and Covenant theology is an outgrowth of the Reformation, which typically gets dated to 1517 and onward, with Martin Luther's posting of the 95 Thesis on the door in Wittenberg. But it did recover a lot of truth. I mean, it's a fantastic thing that happened, and it broke up the joint, kind of like in the book of Acts when the disciples were scattered because of the persecution of the church. I look at the Reformed movement as doing somewhat of the same. It broke up the Roman Catholic monopoly, which was the Holy Roman Empire in Europe. And but the one thing that they didn't fix was this replacement theology. So the church was still the apex of God's purposes, okay? But that's, for those of you that know, that's not true. The church is just, as John Lynn would say, a brief commercial interruption to the otherwise scheduled Israel program. And this purple sketch here will kind of give you a hint, because Israel was Israel back here in the Old Covenant, and they are the recipients of the promises and a fulfillment of the New Covenant. So, that being said, Reformed and Covenant theology lives today in America, in Western society, in Germany, in the United States, in those areas that are concerned themselves with Protestantism. It still fosters an understanding of the church as it replaced Israel. They don't use that word anymore because they know how dangerous it can be. They use the word supersessionism, that the church superseded. It sounds a little more, what's the word? Not quite as jarring. So anyway, but now in 1800, the advent of the 19th century, you had a man named John Nelson Darby and others of his ilk who started to actually read the Bible and not just be led by the nose by what they were taught in church. There's a group called the Plymouth Brethren. Some of you may have heard of it. That's who John Nelson Darby studied with and then eventually became leader of the Plymouth Brethren. The Brethren movement came across the ocean to the United States and fostered its own explosion. That's when Pentecostalism was growing, and people like C.I. Scofield were grabbing onto this understanding of the Scriptures and teaching it. And then in the 20th century, you had Dallas Theological Seminary formed, Louis Berry Schaeffer and John Ryrie. Charles Ryrie? Charles Ryrie. And dispensationalism, which again, it's an outgrowth of the reading what's written, and it recovered the secret nature of the church. But I want to show you that, we in TLTF and in other places are dispensationalists, but we have a little twist to it, okay? All right, what does this mean, dispensationalism? There are dispensations where God, they're called administrations, or they're called offices, or it's where God deals with man by certain rules and regulations, and it's usually over a period of time. But the word dispensationalism, oikonomia, as many of you are familiar with, oiko from the Greek word oikos, which is house, nomia from nomos, which is law, house law. The administration in Washington, D.C. usually refers to the governing authorities, methods and terminologies, while a particular president is in office. Similarly, in the Bible, an administration is how God ruled or had rules that governed mankind, and it actually happened over time. So, and you guys are very familiar with John's teaching from One Day with the Creator If you haven't, please get yourself a copy of that thing and drill down into the chart. Get a chart, get a life. Now, that being said, we know under the teaching of good dispensationalism, the resurrections are Jewish, the rapture, and for you purists, the gathering together. You realize the word rapture is just a Latin translation of a Greek word in the Bible. We like to use it because it's inclusive, not exclusive. So the rapture and the gathering together are for the church. There's a permanence to our salvation, yada, yada, yada. If you want to look at that, when I say yada, 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 that's the Hebrew word, yada, yada, yada. So if you ever want to look at some of the things that attend to the secret, I have another paper. Did I allow you guys to see it? Here it is. Yeah. I have a paper called The Unsearchable Riches of Christ, which really outlay the classical things whereby we know we're different than Israel. So, but we as dispensationalists have a little twist. That's why I say up here a little twist. We're Unitarians, meaning we're in a non-Trinitarianism and this viewpoint. And this, I point out here, is the most important. We believe the dead are dead. That's called mortalism in theology. If you ever read that, and I encourage you to see the movie Hell and Mr. Fudge, or The Fire That Consumed, his book. I happen to have it up here. No. Get yourself a copy of the book, The Fire That Consumes. We are here, down here. Here it is. And I can't even pronounce it tonight. Hell is not eternal. That's the hell in Mr. Fudge, and the dead are dead. It's called annihilationism. Annihilationism. See, even I have trouble with theology, and I have a degree in it. So go figure. We believe today that the manifestations exist. Non-cessationism. God is not in control of everything, else you wouldn't have free will. Open theism. Okay, how many more isms are we going to talk about under our twist, our little difference with most of dispensationalism in the world today, because most of them are Trinitarian. They think that the dead go to heaven. They don't believe the manifestations exist. They think that the dead are usually eternally, bad word, not a word in the Bible. Eternal is not a good word. It's a Greekish twist on the word unto the ages. They believe that the evil people that are thrown into the lake of fire burn forever, whatever that means to them, and that God is in control of everything. You can't make a move without Him already having known it. So do you have free will? Of course not. Okay, so how many more isms are there? You don't want to know, really. Honest, there's too many, and I'll only bring them up sparingly in my teachings and research. But on occasion, mortalism. How many of you guys knew that if the dead are really dead and sleeping until the resurrections and or the rapture, it was called mortalism? So there you go. Your great little key tonight, or non-cessationist, or non-cessationism. You can speak in tongues today. You can interpret. You can prophesy. You can get word of knowledge, word of wisdom. You can discern spirits, and you can operate faith, miracles, and the gifts of healing. Those are non-cessationalism attributes, and you don't think that hell is eternal. It ends, because it says so, that the devil is burnt up and he becomes a crisp, and that God is not in control of everything. If he were in control of everything, why do we have a God of this age? 2 Corinthians 4:4. Just think about that. Okay, so how many more isms are there? Maestro, next slide, please. Here, this is where we as dispensationalists stance. Ephesians 4:4-6. One body, one spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all. And I've added a very important term, because one baptism means non-dunkificationism. That's my term. I am copywriting that. Do yourself a favor. If you don't know that there's only one baptism, read John Lynn's book, What is True Baptism? You can get it on the website. Fabulous booklet. Very important term, non-dunkificationism. Just thought I'd let you in on that secret. Yep. Yeah. But this is where all dispensationalists should dance. If you're one body, okay, that is the church, which is his body. The church is not spiritual Israel. Sorry about that. The church is the body. I had a recent conversation with Anthony Buzzard, email. Well, he actually never responded to much of what I had to say. Some of his underlings did, where they believe in that the church is an extension of Israel. It's true Israel, all this gobbledygook. And I said, how many times is that used in the Bible? As opposed to the body image. The body's like almost 30 times in the church epistles alone, one body is used. Okay, we know that there's one Spirit. Okay, we know that there's one hope. The end of all hope is that God comes back to the planet. The heavenly Jerusalem comes to the planet. He's here walking around talking with us, and the meek inherit the earth. Okay, we know that there's one Lord. Okay, that's Jesus right now. We have one faith, and there's one God. But I love the one baptism, non-dunkificationism. That's critical. You know, we no longer. Hey, I know a lot of you guys know in the book of Acts people were water baptized, and you know that Paul deals with some of that stuff in his epistles, and he says, you know, some of you, I baptized a few of you guys, but I'm not baptizing anymore. Folks, he got some revelation that, you know, this works business of baptism was no longer in effect, and it was progressive revelation where one turned into the other. We know that from the first part of the book of Acts, where you know, I baptized in water, but you shall be baptized in Spirit. So not many days hence. It just took a while. You know, the book of Acts is transitional. It took a while for these guys to get with the program, literally the program, the new program. And so it's very important that you understand that, I think I told you this last time, Peter was not the Pope on Pentecost. Of course, he became the Pope in the Roman Catholic etymology, but he was not the Pope on Pentecost. So when he stood up and said, this is that which you heard of the prophet Joel and all this stuff about, you know, the tribulation period, and he did not know the secret at that time, so he was just speaking what he thought. So if you view the Christian scriptures, literally, Acts through the book of Revelation, as a progressive unfolding of this truth of the one body, you won't get yourself into too much trouble. Read the book of Acts as if it's all true what was said, it's all true what was done, but not all of it is doctrinally pure. When you see some of the Peter's, you know, some of the stuff Peter said, some of the stuff that Paul even said early in the book of Acts was what they said, and Luke recorded it, and it was by revelation, and it was, you know, moved by the Holy Spirit. But folks, just as in Job, when Job spoke the truth, you know, in his head, that, you know, God gives and God takes away. I mean, that's what's written in Job. It's true that Job said it, but folks, it's not true. And we only know that because of a later expositing of the truth of God in the progressive revelation. Okay, so I think by way of introduction, you understand that we're dispensationalists with a twist. Okay, I wanted to give you the 10 mentions of the new covenant in the Christian scriptures. And I'll briefly go through them with you. These first three, everybody knows them. They're the parallel versions of the Last Supper and the inauguration of the new covenant by Jesus himself. And I'm going to type in here, in his blood. Okay? Huge key. Okay? Huge key. 1 Corinthians 11. This is Paul's remembrance of Jesus' inauguration. And we do this till he comes. Okay? He says that it's in remembrance. Okay? We're supposed to remember, and that's till he come. Okay? 2 Corinthians, we're going to get heavily into this right here tonight, because it's a thorn in so many Christians' sides that we are called in 2 Corinthians 3:6 ministers of the new covenant. What does that mean? This is I think the central thing I'm going to go over with you tonight. I think I had promised to go over with you some verses in Peter and in Galatians and in Romans 9:11, but that's going to have to go into the future because I just felt I hadn't given you enough foundation on the new covenant and to convince you, which is my purpose tonight, that we are not in New Covenant times. We're not in the New Testament, hence my use of Christian scriptures instead of the New Testament. Okay, so here's a few more verses in the Bible, in the Christian scriptures that use the word covenant, new covenant, better covenant. Hebrews 8, verse 8 is simply a quote from Jeremiah 31:31, a reference to Israel. In Hebrews 9, verse 15, Jesus is presently the mediator of the new covenant. Romans 11, verse 27, is a reference to the future new covenant with Israel. You can look at these up and you tell me if I'm wrong. I'm not. But Hebrews 12, verse 24, I give you the context. Folks, you can't do Bible research if you just pluck a verse out of thin air and throw it on a page and see if it sticks. That's called proof texting. You'll hear that. And people will accuse you of it because they don't like your theology. But if you read the context, I've given you the context here. If you do the greater context chapter, it's even a better thing because you can read it over and over again, and you understand when the prophet mentions the new covenant, it's with a context. Okay, so Hebrews 12, again, Jesus is the mediator. That's twice that he's called the mediator. Same Greek word, the mediator of the new covenant. As I say, same as Hebrews 9:15. And then the final reference that we're not going to read all this stuff. This is for your spiritual enrichment and enjoyment. Jesus has become a guarantee of a better covenant. Okay? This little phrase here, Jesus has become a guarantee. It's the word surety. He's become a surety of a better covenant. Just, folks, just think about how that sounds in your head. He has become, that's a past participle, has become a present passive participle. He has become, or maybe a past aorist participle. I have to look it up in the Greek. Has become a guarantee, a surety of a better covenant. Now, that better covenant is the new one. And if he's a surety of it, then understandably, it gives you a sense that it's not here yet. His assurity, his guarantee of it. And we'll get into a little bit of that tonight. Okay, I want to show you a few verses. Back to the covenant context. I told you my favorite verse these days when discussing covenant is this lovely verse in Hebrews 8:13 that says, when he, God, or the prophet, depends on the context, can't remember. The New American Standard capitalized he, so it magically became God. Or it could be Jeremiah, and it could have been not a capital H. But when he said a new covenant, it's God. He, God, has made the first obsolete. So the first mention of a new covenant, which I might even be Jeremiah 31, he made the first one obsolete. But whatever is becoming, look at the verbs here. I'm going to do this again. Becoming obsolete, growing old. These are all participles. It's a present occurrence. I believe they're even present participles. Is ready to disappear. It ain't gone yet. All right. Brief aside here, folks. Reformed and Covenant theology will take this verse and say, oh, that was in Hebrews. Paul was writing, or whoever you want to have written Hebrews. Paul was writing to the church before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, all the things that Jesus said came to pass in the destruction of Jerusalem, yada, yada, yada. And they build their theology on the fact that Hebrews was written before 70 AD. No way to prove that. They just have to have that to make it work. It's a rubber crutch because we know that what Jesus said wasn't in reference to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. If I could blow that up on a poster for theologians and just say, why do you persist in that error? It doesn't even fit into the, when Jesus said, this generation shall not, see death and till the coming of the Son of Man or something similar to that. I can't remember the exact quote. They say, see, Jesus can't lie. He's God. He had to be true. Let's find a historical event that is good for that. Oh, the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple was torn down, blah, 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 blah. They don't realize that there's still a Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is still up. The temple didn't get totally destroyed. But no, let's not cloud the error with truth. Okay, but that's my favorite verse on the covenant. Okay, it's becoming obsolete. That's the old one. It isn't even gone yet. Let's go back to this lovely. It's not gone yet. Not quite gone. Okay, and there's other verses that we're going to go over tonight that speak to that exact same thing. Okay, here's one in Hebrews. It's part of the mention of another covenant. So much the more also Jesus has become a guarantee, an ugos, a surety of a better covenant. We're in Hebrews. Paul is writing, presently he has become. Jesus has become this. Okay? I'm going to show you a verse later. It's going to blow your mind. Well, maybe let's see if I can find it here. It'll come up in a minute. Okay, 2 Corinthians 3:11. Again, we're going to get into this context deeply. For if that which is being made useless, the context is regarding the old covenant. For if that which is being made useless is through glory, much more that which is remaining is in glory. Well, Jesus initiated the new covenant, and it is remaining. It didn't go anywhere. It's not entirely here yet, but that which is being made useless. Verbs are critical in the Bible, especially when I show you theological, what do I call that? They just weasel. That's the word, weasel words. They take what's clear in the Greek and they translate it horribly. Okay, so let's go back here. Okay, here's some questions for you. If the new covenant, and I know I'm pounding away at this, and some of you may not understand the full nature of why I have to do this, but if you're ever cornered, look, I have a pretty good friend that's being sucked back into Reformed theology. And some of you that know the history of the Way International, Victor Paul Wierwille was a Reformed theologian. He was in the Dutch Reformed Church, and he got, I'll call it, turned from the dark side and became a dispensationalist and taught many of us stuff we hadn't heard ever, stuff about the secret. And just, but there are some friends of mine are just, they're being turned back to this very ineffectual theology that totally denudes the church of the power to deliver people and totally takes you back into law. And it's disheartening to me, and it's I'm using this WebEx as an occasion to sort of point out the highlights of what they teach and what they shouldn't. But if the new covenant were in total effect for Christians, don't you think the Christian scriptures would shout that to the entire world? Okay, the Jews are no longer God's chosen people. We are. Yay! Of course, that'd be a little difficult for, and Peter said it was kind of difficult for Paul to get that message across that Christians are kind of not Jews, and kind of this is a pretty special period of time where Christianity is no longer no Jew nor Greek, bond or free, male or female, all are one in Christ Jesus. In Christ Jesus, that's relationship. Okay, it's a bit of a change for a Jewish prophet, and I'm telling you, it's just not in there. if all the promises of the new covenant had been transferred, I'm trying to use words that um, might convey what Reformed and covenant theology teach. If it had been transferred from Israel to the church, don't you think the Christian scriptures might have said that somewhere in clear and plain language? Now, there's some stuff about the promises of God and the church having gotten some of those things. It says in Romans 8:23, we have the first fruits of the Spirit. That's the cutting edge of new covenant power. Where in Hebrews, again, I'll say it, it says we have a taste of the power of the age to come. What's the real power? And look how powerful the stuff is that we have. Okay, if there were not a future for the nation of Israel, don't you think the Christian scriptures might have said this in concise and natural fashion? Those are all rhetorical. Yes, they are. Okay, we're going to go into some meat here. We know, I'm going to go down a couple of slides, okay? We know that it says in this little, I'm going to highlight it here, God, who hath made us able ministers, servers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit, for the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. I'm going to show you some scriptures that maybe will turn your head around as to what the word ministered is. I was going to title this WebEx, Who's a Minister? And this is kind of the chewy caramel center of what I'm teaching tonight. There are other scriptures that talk about what it means to serve another generation. And the first one is, I'm going to take you back to we're going to get to 2 Corinthians 3. Don't you worry. That's I'm only 45 minutes into this. Full 45 more minutes. Holy smoke. Who's serving whom? Hebrew prophets were serving Christians. How, you ask? Let's read this very familiar verse. It was revealed to them. 1 Peter 1:12. Those of you that can't follow this on the bouncing PowerPoint. 1 Peter 1:12. It was revealed to them, the Hebrew prophets, that it was for your sake and not their own that they were acting as servants, delivering the message which has now been announced to you by those who preach to you the gospel through the Holy Spirit sent from heaven. Even angels long to catch a glimpse of these things. Why is that? Because they couldn't see him before, folks. They were just as much in the dark as the people in the book of Acts were until God started giving the holy apostles and prophets revelation. Angels long to catch. That's the Greek word lust after, by the way. They wanted to catch a glimpse of the stuff that God's pouring out in buckets now to the Christian prophets. But these Old Testament, these Hebrew prophets, and by the way, there is one verse that I found in 2 Corinthians 3 that uses the word Old Testament. So I'm correcting my former WebEx where I said there was only one hint of it. There's an actual usage, and it even talks about the Jewish people reading the Old Testament. So, John, I have to totally change my stance on this now. I still like Hebrew scripture because it just takes the focus off the covenants and puts it where it should be. But these old prophets, these Hebrew prophets, were acting as servants, delivering the message which has now has been announced to you. That was a message that was written in the Hebrew scriptures. Now, this acting as servants is the Greek word formed, I believe it's let's take a look, Bob. We're going to look. 1 Peter 1:12. We're going to go to Bible work. Lovely Bible work. Everybody loves Bible work. Eventually, I'm going to change the logos, but I am not that good yet. Okay, here we are. And I'm going to go to multiple versions. And we're going to go down a little bit and look at the Greek here. Okay. We'll use the Young's literal translation. Hope everybody can see it. 1 Peter 1:12. To whom it was revealed that not to themselves, but to us were they They were ministering these things, okay? They were ministering these things. It is a verb. It's an indicative, imperfect, active third person plural, okay? The reason I can know that, I've highlighted it in the text up here. I put my cursor over it and hold the shift key down, over the Greek word. It's this Greek word here, diakonoun. It is, if I put my cursor over it, a verb. Okay, so it's the verb that's attached to the Greek word diakoneo, which means to serve or to minister. Okay, to minister, to serve. And so back to the WebEx, back to the PowerPoint, pardon me. They were acting servants is a fine translation. I use the New Jerusalem Bible here. I like the way it translated. Acting as servants, delivering the message. Remember that phrase, okay? That's serving. So these Hebrew prophets, these guys that are long since dead before 1 Peter was written, were serving the people listening to Peter's message here. Let's go to the next thing, next context. Jesus, a servant to Israel. Now, I want you to see that I've quoted the NASB, which is the New American Standard Bible, where I say that Christ has become a servant, a minister, okay, to the circumcision on behalf of the truth of God to confirm the promises to the Father. Some of you are very familiar with this in the King James. And the rest of this section here, some of us have been working offline. We won't get into too much of that. I just wanted to make sure you got the context. But has become a servant. Let's go back to Bible work in Romans 15:8, and I want to show you a few things there. And just a simple verse and how screwed up your head can get without knowing to read with some delicacy these verbs in the Greek. What did I say? 15, end of the chapter. So, and Paul's writing to Rome, okay? He's writing to a Christian church. Let's see here. Oh, King James, everybody's familiar. Now, I'd say that Jesus Christ was a minister of the circumcision. That takes your mind, and he says, oh, yeah, Paul's telling him that Jesus ministered to the Jews, and so forth. Okay. Here's another one. The Darby or the ESV. Christ became a servant to the circumcised. With that translation, you can say, oh, yeah, he was, born into Mary, born into the Jews, lived under the law. He became a servant. Yeah, he served that generation. That's great. But literally, folks, down here in the Greek, I am hovering over the Greek word, gegenesthai, okay? By hovering over it, we're going to look at it. A verb, it's an infinitive perfect passive. And the correct translation, the best translation, is NIV and NASB. Has become. Has become. Now, all right, I guess that's about the only two that I see that really nailed it. In this case, the New Jerusalem is horrible. I tell you that Christ's work was to serve. That's not it. It has become a servant. And what does that mean? Paul's writing to the Romans. He's telling them, Jesus Christ. Now, was he the Christ when he was walking the planet? No, he became Lord in Christ after his resurrection. So after his resurrection, Christ has become a servant of the Jews. You see the subtlety there and how critical it is in interpretation and application, and especially as relates to the covenant for Jesus. Look, we looked at some of the things here. That's why I gave them to you. He's the mediator, of the new covenant. That's twice. Mediator here, mediator here. He has become a surety, a guarantee of a better covenant here. And then the Romans reference that I just read you, which doesn't have the word covenant in it, but he has become a servant to the circumcision. Okay, who's that? Well, it's not a figure of speech here where it's in reference to the church. In a couple places in the Pauline epistles, it is when, circumcision. You are the circumcision. I think it was at Colossians or Philippians where you are the circumcision. But this is a context where he's talking about Israel. See all these capital letters here in my quotation from the NASB? That's all quotes from the Old Testament. And he's making a point in chapter 15 about Israel and their future. And you go ahead and read that context, okay? Because it is the God of hope that we're talking about here. And the hope of the nation of Israel is that they actually will all be saved. I believe that's in this context, chapter 15, or maybe it's chapter 11. It's in chapter 11. But Paul's discussion here relates to Israel and how Jesus has become, not Jesus, pardon me, Christ. And King James, by the way, has Jesus Christ. And the best texts are just straight up Christ. And he's Christ after the resurrection. After the resurrection, Christ has become a servant, a minister to the circumcision. How? Or why? On behalf of the truth of God. What? To confirm the promises given to the fathers. Folks, those promises are not totally fulfilled. There are a few little things that have happened. That's the benefit of being in the dispensation of the grace of God, the dispensation of the secret. We'll get into that. Okay, so let's get into the meat of and potatoes of this teaching here. We are servants of the new covenant. Okay, we in King James, everybody's familiar with King James. Okay, we have who has made us able ministers of the New Testament. And everybody stops it right there and goes, "Oh, we're ministers. We're in the New Testament. That's us. We've inherited the New Testament. We're in the New Testament. We are the New Testament. We're ministers. Yay, let's go out and get our fish hats and parade around and blah, blah, blah." Not true. I'm going to ask you a few more questions. Do you recall any context in your reading in the Christian scriptures that indicates the new covenant with all its attendant features is in full operational mode today? Do we have a fully operational Death Star? No, we don't. We use Star Wars. Are all things in Jeremiah 31 through 34 accomplished anywhere? Have you read that? You guys have read that. Why not? Let's read that. Jeremiah 31. It's the most pregnant of all contexts that give us an understanding of exactly what the new covenant is. Okay, we're going to go down here, Jeremiah 31. Pardon me, I didn't get to Jeremiah 31, and it's like four verses. Ingrain this in your cranium. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Does it say the word church? Of course not. Not according to the covenant I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand and to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was an husband to them, unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make in the house of Israel after those days. What days? Well, read the context. It's the end times, the last days, saith the Lord. I will put my law in their inward parts and write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. Okay, a lot of people take that as a figure of speech. I'm going to write this on their hearts. I'm going to put it in their inward parts. Great. Next verse. They shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall know me from the least of them unto the greatest, saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. So, is that happening today? Are you no longer teaching your neighbor anything about God? No. Okay? That is probably one of the greatest, what is the term in philosophy? Not a non sequitur. It's a point upon which your logic can, pin itself. Maybe you take this first part that, I'm going to put their law in their inward parts. I'm going to write it on their hearts. Oh, that sounds so poetic, and that's what Jesus does for us. No, but then they won't need to teach their neighbor anymore. There's no figure of speech there, okay? And if you were to go to, and so God says, I will forgive their iniquity. I'll remember their sin. A couple more verses. Thus saith the Lord, which giveth the sun by light of the day, the ordinances of the moon and stars, light by night, which divides the seas when the waves thereof roar. All you ancient Near East cosmology freaks, the Lord of hosts is his name. If you look at Joel 2, the stuff that Peter was quoting on the day of Pentecost, and you read that context, the sun's going to be dark, the moon's going to turn to blood, your sons and daughters will prophesy. Well, what is that? We'll just go to Acts. We'll just see what he quoted here. And we'll go to the NASB so you can see that he's quoting from Joel. Okay, 2. Where is he? Okay. And it shall be in the last days, Acts 2, 17, Peter talking about, everybody thought they were drunk. Well, they're not drunk. Eddie DeBrule and I were talking about this why Peter was saying they weren't drunk. But it happens to be, we're in this context again, Eddie. And it shall be in the last day. Where? The last day. That's where Peter thought he was. I will pour forth of my Spirit on all mankind. And your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see dreams. Even my bond slaves, both men and women, I will in those days pour forth my Spirit. I will grant you wonders in the sky above, and signs in the earth below, and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness, the moon to blood, blah, 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 blah. This is new covenant times, folks. Has it happened yet? Duh. No, has not happened yet. But you'll be told it has by Reformed covenant theologians when they start talking to you about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Just make them read stuff. Please, make them read it. Okay? Back here to the WebEx. Did I put it up here? Yes. Is there somewhere in the Christian scriptures that says there is one people of God for all time? That's another term that Reformed covenant theologians and teachers want you to subscribe to or ascribe to. We don't. It's not a term in the Bible. There is not one people of God for all time, some seamless thread of believers that, culminated in the church. It's just not in there. Here's another. I'm on the subject, and I haven't used all my time. I have another half hour. Here's what else they'll throw at you. There's only one gospel. Okay? No, there's not. The gospel means good news. There's a gospel. Adam and Eve had a gospel, and it's not the same thing you got. Okay? What's the good news? Don't eat of the tree. Okay? Because if you do, you're going to become gods like us. Okay? Or, all the trees in the garden you may freely eat. You can prance around in this garden. It's a lovely place. Name the creatures. Hey, that's good news. Okay? There's a gospel in every administration, but Reformed covenant people will say, "Oh, there's only one gospel. Oh, there's only one people of God for all time." They use the word covenant of grace or covenant of works. Don't be tricked; those are unbiblical terms. It's just like Trinity. Don't let them pull the wool over your eyes on this stuff. Keep it simple. Keep it safe. I'm back into my Lord of the Rings. Gandalf telling him to keep the rings, keep it safe. Keep this stuff safe. Don't let this be lost again. We can't let it be lost again. So we're servants of the new covenant. How would that be? How would that work out? Let's look. I'm going to go through 2 Corinthians 3 with you because it's important that you see this stuff for yourself, okay? And I'm going to start it with a story of a friend of mine who's turning me back on the concept of a future new covenant. He wrote to John Lynn and I, a while back and just said, I've read this context for I think he said about 40 years, and I'm rethinking my stance on this. And so I wrote back to him and I said, look, no, let's go through that. I'm gonna go through with you tonight what I did with him. And after I was done, nothing. I got no response. And right now, I think he's being tricked into thinking that we are ministers of the New Testament, New Covenant, and that we are in New Covenant times, and all the attendant things that go with that. I've explained a few of them. And with that being said, let's just read the Bible. 2 Corinthians 3:1-4. Do we begin again to commend ourselves, or need we, as some others, epistles of commendation, sorry, John, to you, or letters of commendation from you? You are our epistles written in our hearts, known and read of all men, for as much as ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Christ, ministered, I love that word, ministered, served, oh, thank goodness, served by us. I believe that's a different word than diakoneo, but ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone, but in fleshly tables of the heart, and such trust have we through Christ the God. I'm not going to teach you this context. I'm just going to point out some things. When Paul starts using fleshy tables of the heart, it comes up later. Tables of stone, it comes up later because the old covenant was on tables of stone. And that's why I'm taking you here, Old Testament, New Testament. What's the context telling us here? And here's the next slide. It's full of Bob's weird. This is how I study the Bible. So you're the mind of Minolta. This is the mind of Wacky Bob. This is the most important section, this context of verse 4-11. We're going to go through it very carefully. Not that we, Paul says, are sufficient of ourselves to think anything of ourselves, but our sufficiency of God. Maybe that should have gone up to the other context. Who, God, hath made us able servers of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life, makes life. That's my note there. So the Spirit makes alive, and or quickens. That's what it is in many versions. But here we go. If the ministration of death, and that's the word ministry or servery, if the ministration of death, written and engraven in stones, old covenant, was glorious, so that the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses for the glory of his countenance, which glory was to be done away. Folks, here's the better translation. Is being made useless. It's a present passive participle in the Greek. Being made useless, or is being made useless. Okay. The glory of his countenance, the glory which was this ministration of death was glorious, but is being made useless. How shall not the ministration, little things are moved, ministration or ministry of the Spirit, that which, is the new covenant, be rather glorious? Okay? How shall not that ministry be rather glorious? Okay? This, I'm going to highlight it for you. I've given you a little carrot here. This shall not. It's a future middle verb. How shall that ministry not be rather glorious? It's a future verb. For if the ministration of condemnation, that's why I tied these two red ellipses together, be glory, much more the ministry or ministration of righteousness exceeding glory. For even that which was made glorious, that old covenant, had no glory in this respect by the reason of the glory that excels. For if that which is done away, in Greek says, is being made useless, was glorious, much more that which remains is glorious. So Paul acknowledges that the new covenant has been inauguralized. It's here. Okay? It's Paul recognizes that Jesus, inauguralized the new covenant in his blood. But he also recognizes that the old covenant is being made useless. It's a process. Again, I'm going to go to the chart. The process is it's not gone yet. And I've shown you this a couple times, that lovely verse from Hebrews, where did I put it? This one here, is becoming obsolete, right? Growing old, ready to disappear. Everybody thinks, for some reason, that the old covenant, poof, went away when Jesus died. Is that true? Or is Paul alive? We're following Paul here, folks. What would Paul think? Paul is writing to the Christian church. Whatever is old is becoming obsolete. It tracks exactly with 2 Corinthians, that which is done away or is being made useless, it was glorious. Hey, the old covenant was the best thing the Jews could ever have. And the fact is that it was fabulous until the new one came on the scene. The new one came on the scene and in its trail brought along a secret. Oh my goodness. Yes, it did. It was totally unexpected. Here, Jesus inauguralized the new covenant. He brought it into fruition. And then, by the way, he died, left, and God raised him from the dead. And he awaits at the right hand of the Father, where he is a surety, it's going to happen, of a better covenant. He is now the mediator of that covenant. He has become a servant. What was that we saw? Not that one, this one. No, not that one, this one. He has become a servant to the circumcision on behalf of the truth of God to confirm those promises given to the fathers, the ancestors, oh my goodness, it's fabulous. So back to this context, we're down to verse 11. Now the final section of 2 Corinthians 3, and then you'll really get it. Seeing that we have such hope. Oh my goodness, how come they can't read that word? What's the definition of hope? Hope that is seen is not hope. Are we seeing the new covenant lived out in the world today? Do you realize what is attendant to that new covenant? There is the entire land of Israel that becomes the Jewish nations. Oh, we'll get into a little bit of it. Oh my goodness, look, Paul says it right in this context. How can my friend miss this? I don't know. Seeing then that we have such hope. Hope of what? The new covenant. What was the verse right before it? That which remaineth is glorious. We have such hope. We use great plainness of speech. Of course you do. Of course we do. We're ministers of that covenant. What did the prophets of old, what were they ministering? They were acting as servants, ministers, same Greek word, delivering the message. Jesus has become a servant, a minister. He's the mediator of the new covenant. He's the surety of the new covenant. That doesn't mean it's in its full-blown attestation. If we have such hope, we use great plainness of speech, because what? We're delivering a message. And not as Moses, which put a veil over his face, the children of Israel could not steadfastly look to the end of that which is abolished. I want you guys to look up that Greek word. I don't think it's totally abolished. I would bet my bottom dollar, I don't know why I didn't put it in here, but I would bet my bottom dollar it's in the passive mood. Okay, Somebody get back to me, please. But their minds were blinded, for until this day remains the same veil taken away in the reading of the Old Testament. There it is. There's the one in the entire, Christian scriptures. Which veil is done away, is made useless in Christ. But even to this day, unto this day, Moses has read the veils upon their heart. Nevertheless, when and this is King James, and it really should be they. It's a better word here is they. Better texts have the verb in the third person. They shall turn to the Lord. Who's they? Israel. Israel, who he says in Romans 11, blindness in part has come to Israel. Okay? Part of Israel is not blind, and therefore Israel continues. Okay? That's why Peter writes to Jewish Christians, because they are the Israel of God. We'll get into that in a future WebEx, because I still have to handle that section in Galatians. I think it's 3:6, where it does talk about the Israel of God, and some people just think that that's the church, and oh my goodness, it's just not. Israel is Israel, bloodline. Okay, so what did I do? Nevertheless, when they shall turn to the Lord, the veil shall be taken away. Exactly what he says in Romans 11. All Israel will, plural, future, be saved. When? In the future. Now, the Lord is that Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But we all, with open face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. I'd love to hear John Lynn teach on this again. He makes it live. So, what are Christians to do? Be servers of the new covenant, just like those prophets of old were servers to us by delivering the message. And it's the gospel that is preached to them now. Just think in the same way that Peter portrayed it in 1 Peter 1:12. They delivered the message which is now being preached to us. Okay? How do we deliver the message? Preach, teach. Teach others who will learn to teach others, okay? We deliver the message, okay? That's what it is. And here you're going to get this chart again. I'm going to go over it with you real quick. Jesus said, the new covenant in my blood inaugurated. I'll give you the scriptures that I gave them to you above. And Paul says we do this in remembrance of it till he comes. That give you a sense of the future? Of course it does. Jesus is the mediator of the new covenant, has become a servant under the circumcision, has become the surety of the better covenant, Hebrews 7:22. And the Christians were servers of the new covenant as well. Okay? So now, I suppose, somewhat in closing, I have copied and pasted 1, 7, 13 things from a booklet that John Lynn and his compatriots wrote called Defending Dispensationalism, and it's the reasons the Christian church is not in the new covenant. Oh my goodness, I don't know if I want to, I guess we can read it. I have a few minutes. We'll read it and then we'll talk. A covenant is a solemn promise binding two parties in an agreement. In certain biblical covenants like the new one, God binds, oh, by the way, my red marks, those are my insertions. Binds himself unconditionally by his love and grace to perform specific promises to specific people. Israel. These promises cannot be disannulled unless somehow God said so and he didn't. And neither can they be fulfilled only in part. I mean, what is that? What's a fulfillment in part? It's not. It's not a fulfillment. It's the wrong word usage. If it's fulfilled, it's fulfilled. Filled in part. They must at some point be fulfilled completely, or God's righteousness would be compromised. Lovely. And he be found a liar. The church cannot fulfill the new covenant because it wasn't addressed to them. It was the house of Israel, house of Judah. Then it must be in a different relationship. Yes, it is. Our relationship is in Christ, in the Lord. Israel cannot claim this relationship. Why, folks? Here's another thing you're going to hear out in the street, okay? You're going to hear, oh, one people of God for all time. And yes, everybody was in Christ. The saints, Enoch and Noah and all these, they were in Christ. It was just, and then they'll hear the thing. They were saved looking forward to the Christ. The people at Jesus' time were saved because the Christ was there, and now we're saved looking back, and it's all about the Christ and this and that. Okay, folks, look. Old covenant saints could not be in Christ. He wasn't the Christ until God made him Lord in Christ. Can you just make sure you're tracking with this stuff? You can't be in Christ unless you're in Christ. You can't have this some prophetic thing. Look, the words in Christ are nowhere but the church of Christ. Nowhere. Okay? I'm getting angry. All right, number 2. Covenant was made with Israel, the physical descendants of Abraham according to the flesh, and with them as specific nation. Remember Deuteronomy 32:8. God's portion was Israel. All the other nations he gave to the other sons of God, and they're screwing it all up. We know that from Psalm 82. Since the church is neither Jews nor Gentiles, that's what the word means. Gentile means nation. How can the church fulfill this covenant? That's the rhetorical question. Since the Abrahamic covenant promises Israel a permanent existence as a nation, it's a physical country. I sort of, got out ahead of myself because down here we know it's called the Promised Land. It was promised. They never got it. And the church is not fulfilling Israel's promises. Look, I'm not going to read all these. They're for your learning. I've added a few of my own comments in here. The church is not in the new covenant. It's Jesus was a Jew. He wasn't the first Christian. We know that. He made the covenant, became ratified in his blood. His body was broken for us. Yes, there are fabulous things that are introduced by Paul, Peter, James, John that super exceed some of the things expected in new covenant, in the new covenant relationship, like, permanent salvation, speaking in tongues, born of God. That's 1 John. All these things that, the unsearchable riches of Christ, they're phenomenal. But, we're not Jews. We're not spiritual Jews. We're not spiritual Israel. We're not the new, true, blue Israel. We're not Israel at all. Unless you're Jewish, you can't claim to be Israel. Okay? And this is critical in the interpretation of Pauline theology, Pauline writing, the stuff in Peter, James, and John. Folks, Hebrews, if you don't think, Paul wrote Hebrews, I do. Get careful reading. If something comes up in your mind, it doesn't read right, dig back into the Greek. Look at the verbs. Someday I'll do a WebEx on verbs. How exciting, Bob. Verbs, because verbs excite me. Jesus has become a servant of the circumcision. Jesus had, or Christ, I think it is in Hebrew. Christ has become a surety of a better covenant. Awesome stuff. So with that, I think I will save and close this PowerPoint.